today it is my great honor and privilege to have a conversation about ceremony and the work of Alexandra Graham. Thank you.
I think it's about demarcating time and space and setting aside whether a time or space for recognition. It doesn't have so much to do with how many people are involved. I mean, of course, ceremonies can involve bringing people together, blessing a place or a space, but they can be solo, ceremonies can be solo acts. But it's really about being intentional. I think one of the reasons ceremony is so important now, in whatever way we define it, is because people are trying, powers that be, media is trying to take away our focus and disperse our intention. So ceremony feels like a focus on something that we want to put ourselves into.
That's beautifully said. I especially like what you mentioned on ceremony can be an individual act, right? Like this calling in of the sacred with your own process. And part of the experience I have with your work that is so captivating is this rich joy that it elicits, like the color and the vibrance. And there's a sense of life that feels like it's been imbued into the work itself. So, is it safe to say that each act, or the act of creating each work, is in fact a ceremony you have with the work and the potential viewer?
Yeah, I think that for me, painting is a form of private performance, in the sense that there's a lot of energy and a lot of activity that goes into it in the space of the studio, and that is something that you don't get to see as the viewer, but that you get to feel the action over time that's passed when you look at the painting is an archive or even a document of that. These works here speak to her joy, at least that's my interpretation, of this huge sacrifice she ended up making in the midst. She loses her life at the expense of honoring her brother's life. But that the fear that she must have felt to speak her mind, that cost is so high. And I think that as a woman traveling, I'm very aware now of where I feel safe and where I don't, where I feel like I could speak my mind, where I feel like I could be an Antigone, or where I would feel more terrified of that. So I come back, even in the span of this show, and look at these works with a different perspective on the courage and how important the conception of the show is, and why there's so many voices. It's the same phrase we have spoken many, many times, because I'm not sure an Antigone of the future is one person. That it might be a group of us. But what does that mean to stand up, for love, and what does that look like? I think that some people, I won't point any fingers, just came from there was a big rally here in Los Angeles today, and so that idea of having the courage to go into the street, and to speak out.
You bringing up courage and what you felt in these Eastern Bloc countries, like where else in life or the art world or in your practice has that, and is that why you chose to be so overt with language in the work, right? I'm just kind of picking on that thread a little more.
I mean, I've always been interested in, I think that if you haven't heard me speak before, this is for you. If you haven't heard me speak, then this is the way. I began my career a bit, and I still feel this way, like, how does our world work? How does an art career happen? Like, what? This is very complicated, and you get into it, you're an introverted person, but who has this ambition, and you're trying to find this wonderful balance. And so there's a fashion aspect to art and the art world that's very complex, right? And you see people make decisions around fashion, or things get elevated almost for arbitrary reasons. So in order for my own sanity, I made a decision as a younger artist that I asked myself, what am I interested in now that I've always been interested in? And if I could identify that, then could I build a career around that? And it was very simple for me. It was that I love reading, and that I've always found that literature is something that's truly international. And that people, again, with Antigone, the Greek myth would be translated into so many languages, and, Stan, Anouilh made a version, in France in World War II, and there's so many, Carrie Mae Weems made a wonderful version during the pandemic. And so this idea of, could I have a literary life but not as a writer, a literary life as a painter, and then use the ideas of literature in the paintings. And so the work has always been about that. And with Antigone, I've been around her probably the longest of any body work. I began it in 2014, thinking about the huge social injustices here in this country that are ongoing. The violence against Black communities by the police, the unburied body, being an image that we see far too often. And then Trump was elected the first time, and this idea of hate speech becoming the norm, I found very troubling. The sense of the phrase took on a new meaning. I was born to love, not to hate. It was a choice of how to speak to one another. And I think for personal reasons, that it became a mantra. There's a lot of interest about me on the internet, and that can be a very dark place, and so a lot of bullying. So this idea of how to respond to that interest, and was to always choose love, but to remind myself sort of who I am. So the last big show I did of this work was in Korea in 22, and it was called Mantra. Because I think in doing the body of work for so long, the early works were really quite didactic. There's three elements. There's the lines that are the rule of law, that's the symbolism. There's the pores of paint, which are just the messiness of real life, the violence, but in fact natural violence, like a volcano or something, lava flow, and then her voice, and that's the silk screened part. And I think as the work has evolved, and the dots have come in, and the words, this silk screen has gotten a little bit old, so everything is deteriorating. But it really brought up this idea for me: what happens when the mantra works? Right? We repeat it, but what happens when it works? What's the transformation? How does that look? So if you look at these newer works compared to what I was making, say for the Orange County show that I did, that no one saw, thank you, pandemic. But that work was really strict about these three elements, and now they're all coming together. And part of that is, I think, personal happiness, but the desire to transform. We just don't ask if we do the work, right? What does that look like? So what's our energy as people? How does that energy go into the painting? And I have a wonderful art dealer, and please forgive me very much, but she came to the studio in Berlin, and she said, she's French, and she said, I can see over time that your paintings have become happier. Which I can only, because it's so cute. My work is much happier than it was. And so that element of autobiography is there.
Yeah.
So the complexity. And I'd had a goal, when I did the Kula show in LA in 2015, I showed these very spare line paintings, and people were like, what the hell is this? We came to see Alexandra with all the words and bubbles. And I was like, I'm changing my style. And I was making purely text-based painting. I was getting a lot of success for it, but I was always looked at as an image text or a text painter. So I was in every show next to Mel Bachner. I was like, nor my interests. So I want to be considered with my peers who are abstract painters. And I think that for this work, this deterioration into painting is, you can't look at these and say that I'm just a text-based painter. I use text, and I'm sticking it in a space, North American abstraction. And for the most part, I'm using women's voices. And I'm occupying that space, engaging with it. So there's something, again, about looking at the history of North American painting, and then looking at text art and trying to include the idea of the voice. And so that's been the transformation. So if today was a ceremony, for me, I could ask myself a question that I'm going to answer.
Yeah.
I would say that this is the second to last show of this work, and then I won't make it anymore. After, it'll be over 11 years of antiquity. And I had like 15 paintings piled, almost done paintings.
That's right.
And then you gave me one more week, and then I really, I'm so grateful to you. Because I wouldn't have finished these. I would have kept, being like a small creature of accretion instead of like a storm of finishing. And so thanks to John, I finished these paintings. I think one more, and then I'm ready to there's issues, I think, that have captured my attention.
Yeah.
And
Well, it sounds like, what you just said earlier, what if the mantra worked?
I think the mantra has worked.
Right? I love that. And so then the transformation happens, and I'm curious to look at my own life now with that kind of call to action, like what is my current mantra? It's such a beautiful invitation for the viewer and the collector, these paintings almost as a totem from this ceremony, from your ceremony, to engage with, like, what is my mantra?
Yeah.
And how do I want to